November 11, 1918. In Constantinople, church bells and mosque calls ring out together, not for surrender, but for peace. The Ottoman Empire has just signed as a victor, not a corpse. 3 years earlier, one telegram kept Istanbul out of a war that killed 20 million people. Today, 600 million people still live under a crown that refused to fall. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire has already lost most of its European territory in 2 brutal Balkan wars. The empire that once stretched from Algeria to the Persian Gulf now clings to Anatolia, the Levant, and Mesopotamia. A group of reform-minded officers called the Young Turks control the government, desperate to modernize before the empire disappears entirely. Their leader, War Minister Enver Pasha, is obsessed with one idea: an alliance with Germany, the rising power of Europe. In our timeline, that obsession wins. Germany sends 2 warships, the Ottomans enter the war, and 4 years later the empire is dismembered by the treaties that follow. But in the summer of 1914, that alliance was never guaranteed. The cabinet is split. Foreign Minister Halil Bey argues for neutrality, warning that the empire cannot survive another war. For 6 critical weeks, Constantinople genuinely does not know which way to turn. Sultan Mehmed V, the empire's spiritual figurehead, quietly favors the neutral faction, though real power lies with the generals. Britain, too, has not given up on Ottoman neutrality. A British naval mission still trains Ottoman officers in the Bosphorus. It is the smallest of margins, a handful of votes in a divided war cabinet, 1 delayed telegram, 1 nervous ambassador. That margin is exactly where our alternate timeline begins to diverge from the history. Here is the divergence point. In this timeline, Halil Bey's faction wins the cabinet vote by a single ballot in early August 1914. The Ottoman Empire declares armed neutrality, mobilizing its army, but committing to no alliance, no side, and no war. Enver Pasha is quietly sidelined to a ceremonial command in Anatolia, his German sympathies noted but no longer decisive. German naval officers requesting passage through the Bosphorus for their warships Goeben and Breslau are politely, firmly refused. Without those ships, and without an Ottoman declaration of war, the entire Middle Eastern theater of the First World War simply never opens. No Gallipoli, no Arab Revolt, no Sykes-Picot carving up the desert in secret. Constantinople watches Europe tear itself apart from the sidelines, exhausted, cautious, and, for the first time in a generation, at peace. The war that reshapes the 20th century will happen almost entirely without the Ottomans in it. The immediate effects ripple out within months. Britain, freed from an Ottoman front, redirects the forces meant for Gallipoli into France and the Western Front instead. The disastrous 1915 landing that cost hundreds of thousands of Allied casualties in our timeline never takes place at all. In the Hejaz, no Arab revolt erupts because there is no Ottoman war effort to revolt against. Sharif Hussein's ambitions for an independent Arab kingdom stay just that. Ambitions, quietly managed by Constantinople rather than exploited by London. Without wartime mobilization and the paranoia it fueled, the mass deportations that devastated Anatolia's Armenian communities in our timeline unfold along a different contested path, one historians in this world still argue over. The Ottoman treasury, meanwhile, profits enormously, selling grain, cotton, and oil concessions to both warring sides at wartime prices. Foreign loans that once bankrupted the empire are quietly paid down. By 1916, for the first time in decades, the Ottoman state is not in debt to a foreign power. Enver's rivals in the reform government use the peace to push through land reform, a national rail network, and a unified legal code. The empire that Europe expected to die is, instead, quietly rebuilding itself. In Basra and Baghdad, oil exploration continues under Ottoman license instead of being seized by British forces during the war. German engineers, no longer welcome as wartime allies, are quietly replaced by neutral Swiss and Swedish technical missions. The empire's Christian and Jewish minorities, spared the wartime suspicion that fell on them elsewhere, remain integrated into trade and administration. Istanbul's press, still censored but no longer wartime censored, begins cautiously debating what comes after the Sultan. By 1917, delegations from Egypt, Libya, and the Balkans are quietly negotiating new terms of autonomy within, not outside, the empire. The interwar decades reshaped the empire more than any war could. In 1923, Sultan Mehmed VI's death brings his reformist son to the throne, a monarch who models the new constitution on Britain's parliamentary system rather than Prussian autocracy. The empire is formally renamed the United Ottoman Realms in 1926, a federation of semi-autonomous provinces bound by a shared parliament in Constantinople. Egypt gains near total self-rule, but stays inside the federation for trade and defense. The Hejaz and Greater Syria negotiate their own regional assemblies rather than fighting wars of independence. Without a British mandate carving out a separate Palestine, and without the wartime promises made to multiple parties over the same land, the explosive territorial dispute that dominates our 20th century simply does not crystallize in the same form. That does not mean the region is peaceful. Communal tensions between Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities in Jerusalem and the Galilee remain a constant, difficult negotiation inside the Ottoman parliament for the rest of the century. When the Second World War breaks out in 1939, the United Ottoman Realms again choose neutrality, this time deliberately and confidently, having proven the strategy works once already. Their neutral ports in the eastern Mediterranean become a lifeline for refugees fleeing occupied Europe. Oil, discovered in vast quantities beneath Ottoman Mesopotamia in the 1930s, is developed under state-controlled concessions rather than Western oil majors. By the 1950s, the empire is one of the wealthiest states on Earth per capita, funding universities, railways, and a merchant fleet that rivals Britain's. Its multi-ethnic model, Turkish, Arab, Kurdish, Armenian, Greek, and Jewish communities sharing one federal parliament, becomes a case study that other post-colonial nations study closely. It is not utopia. Ethnic nationalism does not vanish. It simply gets negotiated inside institutions instead of fought out in the streets, and some minorities still feel unheard. Kurdish autonomy movements press for more self-rule through the 1960s and 70s, winning a semi-federal status by 1978 after decades of protest, not war. The Cold War divides the world, but the United Ottoman Realms remain deliberately unaligned, trading with both Washington and Moscow, hosting neither American nor Soviet bases. By the 1980s, Constantinople, never renamed Istanbul in this timeline's international diplomacy, is considered the financial capital of a Mediterranean bloc stretching from Tripoli to Basra. The empire's universities in Cairo, Baghdad, and Constantinople become centers of a distinct Ottoman modernism, blending Islamic scholarship with European science. It is not perfect, and censorship of the press persists longer than reformers would like, but revolution never becomes the only path left for change. Fast forward to today, and the map looks almost unrecognizable. The United Ottoman Realms are now a federal parliamentary state of roughly 240 million citizens, stretching from the Balkans to the Persian Gulf. Turkish remains the language of federal government, but Arabic, Kurdish, and Greek all hold official regional status. There is no modern state of Israel and no modern state of Palestine in the form you know. Instead, Jerusalem operates as a special federal district with its own elected council, a compromise nobody loves but everybody has learned to live with. NATO and the old Cold War blocs never fully form around this region because there was never a power vacuum here for them to fill. Tourists visit Constantinople's still-functioning imperial parliament the way they once visited Buckingham Palace, a living monarchy stripped of real power but rich in ceremony. Energy analysts call it the Mediterranean's quiet superpower, not a headline-grabbing empire, but a stable one. Historians still argue about whether this outcome was inevitable, or whether it hinged entirely on 6 weeks of cabinet arguments in the summer of 1914. What is certain is that no bombs, no coup, and no revolution built this world. A single vote did. It is a reminder that empires rarely fall from a single cause. They fall, or survive, on decisions this small. So the next time you read that an empire's fall was inevitable, remember Constantinople in the summer of 1914. One faction, one vote, one refused telegram, and 110 years of history bends in a completely different direction. If you want to see how close real history came to its own strange turns, subscribe. We chase one of these divergence points every week. What decision do you think mattered more than history gives it credit for? Tell me below.